and the way it's meant to run. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in and tuning into New Wave Global. This is a very new initiative that was led by Raza Rumi, as we detailed in a previous episode. Today, I'm your host. My name is Ahmed Nauraiz Rana, and today we have a very esteemed and an honorable guest, Mr. Akbar Ahmed. Mr. Akbar Ahmed has served as the ambassador of Pakistan to the UK. He's an academic, he's an author, he's a poet. He currently serves as the chair of Ibn Khaldun's seat at the American University, and he has been labeled as one of the leading Islamist scholars of modern day and modern age. He has served and worked with various Pakistani leaders, going back to Ayub Khan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and he's also advised the US administration on issues pertaining to Islam and Muslims around the world. So thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Akbar Ahmed. It's an absolute honor to have you.
Thank you, Ahmed, and congratulations for this excellent initiative. Congratulations to you, to Raza Rumi, and all your wonderful colleagues. So I'm delighted to be part of your early shows.
Oh, thank you so much. So for those of our viewers who were not able to join us for our very first episode, I'll just share a brief background about what the initiative entails. As you know, that in this day and age, mainstream media has to some extent gotten really polarized. It is also politicized to some extent. And therefore, we felt that there was a very imperative and an urgent need to create a platform that is more evidence-based, knowledge-driven, and that tends to shed light and focus on issues which are very important, but are not as flashy. And thus, they tend to be ignored by conventional forms of media. Our objective is to engage with academics, with industry experts, with leaders in policy making, to focus on issues pertaining to climate change, technology, economic development, so human capital, things which are really important. Our focus is on Pakistan, the issues that Pakistan tends to face, and how various people residing in Pakistan and out of Pakistan can come together and really contribute towards the betterment of the country. So having said that, I'll pivot the discussion to you. And like I said, speaking of Pakistan and the issues that we face, arguably, the phase that we're going through right now can be, it can very well be observed that this is the lowest of the lows. I mean, in economic terms, not just a few weeks ago, foreign exchange rates, foreign exchequer was touching barely $1 billion. We are literally negotiating with a bilateral counterparts, with multilateral organizations such as the World Bank, the IMF, for loans as less as meager as $1.1 billion. And that is nothing. Like when we are talking about governance, when talking about macroeconomic issues, $1.1 billion is basically pennies. But our situation is such adverse that we're in such a big conundrum that we don't have any other option. We have completely leveraged all our savings, our macro savings, as to say so. There's not enough investment. Our economic issues are we're very much teetering on the rails of collapse. But having said so, the economic issues are just one side of the story. If we look at how we've evolved or devolved, I would say, socially, our gender parity, our gender inequality index ranks us as 153rd in the world out of 156 countries. In terms of judicial index and our ranking, we are in the bottom 10. We are not as isolated internationally, but if you look at the worth of a passport, we are right there with the likes of Somalia, with the likes of Afghanistan. So we've lost the plot. Our corruption perception index is one of the worst in the world. So it's not just the economic issues, but even socially, we've degenerated to a level that is very precarious, that is alarming. And it really begs the question as to why and how we got here. So since its conception, was Pakistan always on this trajectory? Did things go wrong in certain points in history where there was a pivotal shift and our trajectory just went downwards? Or because you've lived through these phases of history, these decades, you worked with the leaders, the policymakers through the 60s, 70s, 80s. We would really like to have your take and for you to, what do you think? What went wrong?
Well, Ahmed, thank you for putting that very gloomy picture for me to explain. As a Pakistani who's grown up with Pakistan, who served in all the parts of Pakistan, in the most remote tribal areas in Balochistan, in the Sindh, in what was East Pakistan. I've constantly been struck by a paradox that the people of Pakistan, wherever I've served, I've found to be hardworking, very dynamic, and very competitive. Take your World Bank, for example, in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I know that many, many Pakistanis would come to the World Bank and do very well. They made a reputation for themselves. Cricket, they were world champions, squash, hockey, etc., etc. And yet you see the plight of Pakistan today. We are really, as you said, all the graphs are actually rock bottom. So what are the solutions? Or has this all an air of inevitability? Is this a Greek tragedy? Now, I look at it this way, Ahmed. I look at it, I step back, and as a social scientist, I look at it on the basis of two big issues that remain unresolved. The first issue, and they're not specific to Pakistan, these issues apply to all countries and nations which emerged in the middle of the 20th century, whether it was India or Nigeria or whichever other country. So the first issue was of the structural relationship between the center and the periphery. So all these new nations had the central government, central administration, the army, the politics of that country, and then the periphery, tribes and communities living on the margins, often being shared by another country which was on the border of this particular country. So for Pakistan, the periphery would be Balochistan, the northwest frontier province, now called the KP province. Now, the problem was that this relationship between the center and the periphery was never resolved in Pakistan. So while the center grew and grew and grew, so it was like you're a bodybuilder, you're building muscles, and one of your arms is really strong and powerful because you're doing all the weightlifting there, and the other arm is not growing in the same proportion and remaining weak. So the sense of grievance, the sense of unhappiness is very pronounced. And that's one characteristic. The center periphery, that has not been resolved even today. So if you were to talk, as I do, I'm constantly in touch with the provinces of Balochistan and the KP, there's a great sense of unhappiness, and they feel we've been left behind. So some of these terrible statistics are magnified in these peripheral areas. And they really, Ahmed, people are living, they're really struggling. They don't have education, they don't have health facilities, they don't have roads. And I just think to myself, my God, it's been so many, it's almost going to be a century very soon, and these people have been left behind. So that's number one, unresolved. And the politicians and leaders of Pakistan have to stop being so narrow-minded and just focusing on their own district or province, and they must look at Pakistan as a whole. And by the way, this is what caused us the loss of East Pakistan. I was in East Pakistan as an assistant commissioner, and this was the feeling in East Pakistan. Bengalis felt we were at the forefront of the Pakistan movement, and yet we were neglected at the end. And literally, there were very few, maybe one or two central secretaries, one or two generals, very few people in the officer cadres in politics, and the monopoly of power went to West Pakistan. Now, there is the one big picture comment. The second big picture comment, Ahmed, and this in a sense comes out of this first comment, is that all new nations had a sense of nationalism. How were they to balance their nationalism with populism, with ethnicity? It's a very delicate balance. And it begins with the work of Herder, who was a great German philosopher. And his work created a sense of nationalism, which was then developed in Germany. And Germany, as you know, had a very highly developed sense of nationalism, which eventually led them into a lot of trouble. The Nazis and so on grew out of that. And their philosophy was blood and soil. So you had to be a son of the soil. You had to have blood. You had to have German blood to be German. Now, this same thesis has in the meantime spread throughout the world. So if you look at what's happening in India today, or Russia, or China, or other parts of the world, this has developed to the point where it's causing a lot of problems for the minority who do not belong to that ethnicity. So in one place, you have one ethnicity, dominant, aggressive, and very often being unfair to the minority. In another place, that same minority could be in the majority. So you're living in a world where you have major problems in terms of this balance between the majority and the minority in terms of ethnicity. So we now come to the third point, which is you asked why is there problems and what can we do about it. Now, as a professor on campus now, for me, education is absolutely vital, absolutely vital. There's no question. As you know, Singapore's success story, you know all the statistics, was primarily because every citizen had the right to be educated and was educated. So the literacy figures were 50, 60, 70%. Take Pakistan's literacy figures. Offhand, Ahmed, if you can give me those figures, they may be 5, 10, 15, 20. They're really appalling. We cannot allow education to suffer to this point. And I'm just appalled at the leaders of Pakistan. They may be educated, which most of them are, but they don't have to inflict this on the rest of the nation. So education is crucial. Economic development is crucial. You know, and we've been talking about IMF and all these economic indices. But for me, I am a traditional law and order man. I've served in the field. I was commissioner of 3 divisions in Balochistan. I was in the tribal areas. Now, these areas are away from Lahore and Karachi, which are the centers of economic and political power. So very often, Pakistanis don't think about these areas. But believe me, and this is on the basis of decades in the field, unless you have a stable law and order situation, nothing works. Economic development will not work and progress will not happen because it's the cart and the horse. The horse must be in front of the cart to be able to pull the cart. Our brilliant leaders in Islamabad have reversed this phrase. So they put the cart before the horse. The cart is pulling the horse. That will not work. It's just a madness. As you know, Einstein said, if you try the same thing again and again and expect a different result, it won't happen. So for me, Ahmed, this may be very simplistic, but till you control the law and order, and that you cannot control without a very solid district administration, clean police, energetic, neutral police, neutral civil servants, and providing justice, accountable and accessible justice to ordinary people, nothing will work. Because if you're a businessman wanting to invest or put a factory in a district and you know there's law and order, people are being kidnapped and they're being picked up, etc., you're not going to risk it. I know in the field this will happen and there'd be major projects, World Bank and so on. I remember a World Bank official was kidnapped and they froze. The World Bank just froze. They said, till you return this officer of ours, we're not even going to talk about development. So I would want much more emphasis on law and order. Now, what we're doing in Pakistan today is literally we're playing volleyball with politics. So, you know, so-and-so is blaming so-and-so, so-and-so is blaming so-and-so. They're trying to trip up each other. And in the process, they're pushing the whole system to the brink. Because if Pakistan collapses, it's like a building. If a building collapses, everyone inside gets injured. Everyone gets hurt. This is what Pakistan is doing. Now, you may say that this is peculiar to Pakistan. It isn't. Other countries are doing it. You look at India or Afghanistan, in some ways, they also have similar problems and they also behave not always in a wise or rational manner. But Pakistan has a tendency, and I'll say this as someone who's lived through the history of Pakistan, to score their own goal, the concept of own goal. For no rhyme or reason, as I said, they've got hardworking, very often brilliant officers in the field, very committed officers, they'll score their own goal. So you'll see this again and again. East Pakistan, to my mind, was an own goal. For no rhyme or reason, they took the majority of the population and cut it off from Pakistan. And so that a big Pakistan was shrunk to half of Pakistan. It makes no sense except it's a Pakistani thing. You know, when you say the phrase, it's a Pakistani thing. So Pakistanis have to, I really think, the politicians who are running Pakistan, including the economists and the intellectuals and the media people, have to begin to look at themselves and ask hard, philosophic, intellectual questions. This is not to just dismiss anything that smacks of a serious idea. It is to sit down and understand their own position, where they're coming from, and where they want to go. You know the famous saying of Confucius that unless you know the past, you cannot divine the future. So we really need to, and that's why I go back to my first point about the center and the periphery. You're coming from there, not a new problem. That problem existed for centuries. Remember, these were the peripheral ideas. even for the British Empire. So that British India, with its headquarters in Delhi, saw these areas as the periphery, and there was always problems there, law and order problems, kidnapping, etc. But they dealt with it. They created a system there. They had political agents, they had agencies, and so on. They dealt with it. Today, we seem to have just given up, so that if there's a killing and murder as is happening now, the TTP is running amok. Our only answer is send in the army, there's more killing and the cycle of violence. A nation like Pakistan, with the figures you're giving me in economic terms, cannot afford to be involved in a civil war, which is where we are right now. So we're facing serious economic problems, serious political problems, and all sorts of rumors of this political leader is about to be arrested, this one's about to be killed, this one's about to be assassinated, and then suddenly you have a civil war situation. And then you have a bigger, more powerful neighbor threatening to take your northern areas. So I think the leaders have to stop roaming around the world and taking these pointless tours and try to bring the political parties together, try to infuse in the civil service structure some sense of commitment, some sense of renewal, because if that doesn't happen, Ahmed, you are describing a nation hurtling towards the abyss. We are going towards the abyss, and I don't know what's going to pull us back. Don't expect, as we always do, that America bacha dega, China bacha dega, because they may not. They may just be fed up of Pakistan. They may say this is an own goal nation. It's a Pakistan thing. Give them something, they'll mess it up. Give them something again, they'll mess it up again. So let's show to the world that we are capable of not messing it up. So this is an analysis based in decades of serving in the field, and very often serving with the idea that the people of Pakistan, I've always found very impressive. You organize them, they give them some initiative, give them support, and they're incredible. They themselves have the solutions to their problems. Just help them and stop hindering them, stop tripping them up, and don't make, as we are doing now, buffoons of yourself. Right now, the image of Pakistan, I'm sitting abroad in the United States, I have family abroad, and it's embarrassing, the younger generation coming up constantly. And they all have this sense of nationalism. We want to do well. We want to be proud about our origin country. And yet the images, the stories coming out make you ashamed of what's happening in Pakistan. All these terrible stories. And especially, Ahmed, what is shocking me, what is really shocking me as a father and a grandfather, are these stories of cruelty, picking up little children, little girls, doing terrible things to them, then their bodies are found dead. I mean, how can Pakistanis be doing this sort of thing? And my mind can't even accept this.
Yeah,
so with that, Ahmed, I'll stop there and then let you pick up any theme you'd like to.
Like I said, and I mean, like you said, the issues are not just economic. They're very much linked to social degeneration as well. And I use the word degeneration because we've seen Pakistan on a downward spiral in terms of all these various social anthropological indicators that have been witnessed. And what really aggravates and fuels the problem is, and what a lot of our leaders and politicians, they fail to realize, is the size of a population. There's seldom any example of a country as big as Pakistan which has ever defaulted on its sovereign debt. So in case a country of this magnitude defaults, then that means there's complete social chaos, there's social disruption. It completely destroys the fabric of the social society and the way it's meant to run. There's lack of food, there's scarcity of essential commodities, and things like that can tend to very exponentially aggravate into scenarios that no country has ever witnessed or experienced before. And additionally, you mentioned a very good point about the difference between the center and the periphery. And then you also spoke about how countries who've gained the independence of nations who were created, there was a sense of nationalism. So there was this bondage or this link of fraternal mutualness, as I would say, having been born with the same blood, being affiliated to the same soil. But what we see in Pakistan is as diverse as it gets. It's a country, it's a fusion of various ethnicities. You cannot box a Pakistani. We are a very diverse nation. And in the modern sense of nationalism and nation states, has that, do you think, been the problem of finding that sense of homogeneity and finding a similar goal where there's differences between the center and center, which, as we know, people who belong to the province of Punjab, who resided there, they were able to capture that power and to assert and maintain their hegemony over other peripheries and even other major big provinces as well. But because of the fact that there's
Ahmed, that I think you put your finger on it, because the demographic structure of Pakistan is a reality. And it's not because Punjab has something negative, but the fact that it is the largest province, it is the province represented in the army, in politics, and it has some of the finest educational institutions. So you'll find that the majority of the politicians or even army officers come from Punjab schools. Most of them, I wouldn't say all of them, a large number of them are from, say, HSN College. So they're networks which very often the smaller provinces like KP or Balochistan or Sindh do not have. And that sense of grievance, the center and the periphery, has not been closed. Now, again, I want to emphasize, this is not only a Pakistan problem. This is a universal problem. In Afghanistan, the central power, the dominant power were the Pashtuns, and the others, the Hazaras and Uzbeks, felt like our people in Balochistan feel they've been neglected. I did a study called the Thistle and the Drone, in which I took 40 case studies, 40, from Morocco right through North Africa into the Middle East and up into the Caucasus Mountains. 40 cases of center versus periphery. There was the same structure. A dominant center, not caring about the periphery, ignoring it. The periphery very often containing minerals, oil, gas. So the center very often just comes in with force. They grab it, they say, this is for us, we're going to use it, and we won't invest in your areas. That makes the situation even worse. And over time, the sense of indignity. Remember, dignity for tribal peoples is very important. So you may be talking like we are talking of economic indices, economic development, but for people in the periphery, a sense of honor, sense of dignity is very, very important, because their way of living is organized around something called a code of honor. Among the Pakhtuns, it's called Pakhtun Wali. Pakhtun Wali means the way of the Pathans. So you will have a sense of hospitality, melmastia. You'll have a sense of courage and honor. Nang is a very important word. It means honor. And then you have a sense of badal. Badal means revenge. So these are important concepts in the concept of Pakhtun Wali. The Baloch have a similar code. The Sindhis will have a similar code. So the result is that code is now activated, where people feel we've lost honor, we haven't gained anything, and we are being humiliated and treated like second-class citizens. Now this, Ahmed, I think, and again, remember I worked in the field, this is very dangerous, because I'm not saying the situation is ripe for the country falling apart, but this creates conditions where large parts of the nation do not feel part of the nation. I go back to 71. Before the firing on the Bengalis in March 71, I talked to Bengalis. I was in the field. 90% were pro-Pakistan. When the firing started, 90% were anti-Pakistan. So we cannot treat people like they are animals, or they're like automatons, and that we are lords and masters, we can do what we want to. We have to be much more sensitive and embrace the periphery. Very important, because without that, the structure of Pakistan is shaking right now. And if anything were to happen, and I'm really worried about the TTP coming in and attacking hospitals and schools and so on, if they continue to escalate, Pakistan will be in very bad trouble, and not just in economic terms, because you don't know what tribal war can do to civilizations and societies. They literally fall apart. Economically, you can still recover. But if there's a civil war situation that develops, it's going to be very difficult. So maybe I'm sounding a bit more dire than I need to, but I'm talking on the basis of scholarship and research. I've told you I've done 40 case studies, and these societies have survived as tribal societies on the periphery over generations. And when colonization happened, they faced a great challenge, because the European colonialists tried to stamp out the identity of the tribal areas. They couldn't succeed. They still had this tribal identity. Then came these new nations, Pakistan or India or whatever, the new nation. And these nations were quite ruthless with suppressing for trying to suppress the periphery everywhere. And they haven't succeeded, and they will not succeed, because without their identity, tribal areas in the periphery are in fact a people without an identity and without a sense of self. So they have to cling on to it. And you're seeing this, by the way, in Iran, you're seeing this in Iraq, you're seeing this right across the belt that I mentioned to you. So these are, Ahmed, I know that you are an intellectual, Raza and all are writers and intellectuals. Your political leaders have to, and your army officers who are running this country with the politicians, have to understand the mechanics of this country. And very often, they don't even bother about this. When I talk to these very senior people in the power elite, they just say, Balochistan kya problem? Wo to unki abadi itni choti si abadi. We'll send in a couple of regiments and divisions and we'll solve the problem. You don't solve problems in your own area with your own people by simply using force. We've seen this. We've seen it fail in 71. We've seen it not succeeding in the present situation. And we need a much more imaginative and wise policy for these areas.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Very rightly put. And especially, I think there's a very imperative need to reevaluate the political structures of the country and how it is governed. And by political structures, I do not only refer to the way the political parties tend to govern and administer, but also the other mega players and stakeholders. That includes the military, that includes the bureaucracy of the country, and then the civil society and the politicians. Speaking of the issues of diversity, you just mentioned India as well. And I do not feel that we are at a stage in 2023 where we can draw a comparison with a country like India. It's way ahead of us. That is the true reality. But we still tend to compare primarily because we share a very similar background, a similar history. We were formed at the same time. And a lot of our initial issues were somewhat the same. And India itself is a country much bigger than Pakistan, and it is much diverse. And despite these issues with various states, people of various different ethnic backgrounds residing in the country, India has been able to transform itself as an economic powerhouse, as an international powerhouse, the power that it asserts in the global arena. However, Pakistan, again, we fully acknowledging the fact the disparity between the state and the periphery, the diverseness still has not been able to really capitalize on its strengths. Like you said, there was a time when we were producing world leaders across industries, whether it's sports, whether it's economics, whether it's physics, subject matter leaders, experts. But now that we look back, we lost as to some periods, very small bursts of periods that were touted as the golden age. So my question is that, what is that one single point do you think when things got wrong, where we could have really capitalized on those opportunities, but we failed to? And our neighbors, even Bangladesh, now they're way ahead of us. So
I know it's quite distressing how these neighbors, we wish them well, but they're moving ahead, whereas we seem to be going in the opposite direction. But Ahmed, I'm not entirely pessimistic, because this may be, and I hope I'm wrong, maybe just a blip in the chart, in the graph, and we may pick up very soon and then catch up with the others. Why is this happening? I want to give you two historical references. One from Dina, the only child of Quaid-e-Azam. I interviewed her for this documentary we made on Quaid-e-Azam. And she said something to me, which I recorded in my book. I wrote a book on Quaid-e-Azam, Mr. Jinnah, and Pakistan and Islamic identity. And she said that Quaid-e-Azam, her father told her that the difference between Hindus and Muslims was this, that if a Muslim got 10 rupees, he would go and eat biryani. I'm quoting her. And he'd just go and enjoy himself. A Hindu would save it. He'd put it away and save it, so that after a time, his wealth would grow. And the Muslim would have enjoyed himself, but finished his wealth. The second quotation is from Brigadier Al-Adrus. It's an outstanding military officer. He was the chief of staff of General Yaqub in East Pakistan in 71. So we knew him, we had family ties. And we were talking about India and Pakistan, the same topic, and how they are moving and how we are moving, etc. And he said he went to one of these schools in India, one of these elite schools, Doon School or one of these schools. And he said every time the results would come out for, say, exams or the names of the sports team, he said we used to take great pride because we used to look at the sports team, football team, cricket team, and all the names would be Qureshi, Ahmed, Khan, Muslim names. And we'd feel so proud. Then we'd look at the results, exam results, they'd all be Gupta and Krishna and so on. And we wouldn't even be there, we'd be right at the bottom. And that struck me. And we remember this 71. And he said that later on, this is going to have an impact on our next generations because the gulf between the two is going to widen and widen and widen. And now, when I look, and we know India's achievements, making satellites and aiming for Mars, etc., etc. But what, as an anthropologist, what is amazing me is the impact on Western culture. I saw in the Montgomery Mall, Ahmed, not far from you, at a theater, one of those big multiplex theaters, this new Indian movie called Pathan, Shah Rukh Khan's movie. And I was just amazed. I was seeing an Indian movie showing at a major theater in a mall. Sociologically, anthropologically, this really indicates that there's a huge impact being made. RRR, as you know, the Indian movie, was actually running for the Oscars. So again, I have to ask myself, we have immense talent. I know the talent the Pakistani actors and filmmakers have, and they're competing. They're really competing against great odds, really great odds. The budget, the law and order, everything affects them. We need to be able to tackle this in a multi-dimensional way. So it shouldn't just be, and I, with great respect, Ahmed, I know you're economists attempting to save the world and save Pakistan in the process. But it has to be more than just economics. These figures are vital and crucial, but the leaders have to embrace all of Pakistan and see these filmmakers, these artists, these intellectuals, the editors, the writers, they're part of the society. And how do we move them forward? That idea has still not taken root. So very often you'll see people will respond if you belong to the Bradri, or if you're someone's Bhatija, or if you have some Siparish, or you're not going to get anywhere. I'm sitting in Washington and I constantly get requests from Pakistanis, please help us, no one's seeing us, ministers don't meet us, civil servants don't meet us. And it's so frustrating, but I'm retired, I'm a nobody. I'm just a teacher on campus. And I ask myself, isn't there anyone even to talk to these people? That's the level of frustration.
That's very, very unfortunate, yes. And I believe that not investing in education at the time when we should have, and still not being able to, has really widened that gap between what we could have been, the potential, and what reality we tend to exhibit and exist in. And I think the leaders and the policymakers, they really need to reevaluate their priorities. And
because Ahmed, this raises the issue, and this is my final big point. This raises the issue of something called the grand narrative. Every nation, we talked about nationalism, has a grand narrative. And a grand narrative is historically rooted. It goes back century, 2 centuries. So every nation, if you see the Indians now, the Indian Hindu community, they began their grand narrative at the end of the 19th century. And by the early 20th century, they had Savarkar and Golwalkar, these are their two ideologues, actually talking about an India which would be Hindu, a Hindutva. This is their grand narrative. A land where there would be only Hindus, and the Muslims and the Christians, who they see as invaders, and very often use very negative terms for them, they would be removed. Now, are they going to kill them all or exterminate them? I don't know, but there's a lot of violence in the air and a lot of violence happening. Now, to counter that, we had the Muslim grand narrative. And here you have this line coming from Sir Sayyid, Allama Iqbal, Qaid-e-Azam, and that ended in the creation of Pakistan. So Pakistan was not just a political creation, a political moment in history. It was the culmination of a grand narrative of the Muslims of South Asia. And we must not underestimate this, Ahmed, because Pakistan created an idea of a Muslim homeland, a free land, a homeland not just for Muslims. Whoever lived there would be there as a free citizen of the state, as Qaeda-e-Azam promised. Now, that is what I think the leaders of Pakistan today have betrayed, because that sense of hope in this idea of Pakistan. When I did my BBC project, Living Islam, they took me all over the world. And there again, whether I went to Morocco or to Uzbekistan, people knew about Qaeda-e-Azam, they knew about Iqbal, they knew about Pakistan. They had so many hopes in Pakistan. Really, they really felt that, you've got to succeed. They would say, you've got to succeed. So again, these figures that you're talking about in this rather gloomy scenario that we're discussing affects much more than just Pakistan. And this grand narrative must be kept alive. It isn't saying that I'm right, you're wrong, but it's saying this is who we are. And this is who we are is based in history. And that includes all the people of Pakistan, whether they're Baloch or Sindhi or Hindu or Muslim, they're part of this grand narrative. I think what the Indian grand narrative has done, it's become too exclusive. It's moving out the Muslims and British, and they can't because they are part of Indian history. So it's a very artificial kind of development of this grand narrative, which will land them in trouble because already there's a lot of tension within India.
But speaking of grand narrative, we do understand we've grown up studying the two-nation theory and the ideology that it entails. And then speaking of the free land, the right of every citizen, regardless of religion, to practice what they want to and to live as they deem right, we've never really seen that ever implemented or employed, even since the creation of Pakistan. So do you think that it is any more applicable as it was back then? Because theory is one thing, but then putting into practice. But rather what we've seen is that it's not just about Muslims or non-Muslims or the Muslim ideology. There's a class that has hijacked majority of the resources in Pakistan and majority of the decision-making powers as well. And the oppression is no longer limited, and it's no more a clash of Muslim, non-Muslim, but rather it transcends into your social standing, it transcends into your ethnicity, it transcends into, like you said, which part of Pakistan do you really belong to? So the discrepancies are no longer ones that were captured by the grand narrative, as you said, that was initially instilled to counter I'm assuming the Hindutva ideology. But now the issues that Pakistan is facing and the problems when you speak to a common man, if you're out on the ground, his issues are less related to, again, the ideology and the formation of Pakistan. But now he's striving and skirmishing for basic necessities, so it's basic rights. And
Ahmed, you're absolutely right. You see, look at it this way. A nation must have a glue. Something must hold it together. First point was the center and the periphery. So that is causing a lot of problems right now and may cause more problems later. Second is the grand narrative. You don't have an idea of what is holding you together. So today I talk to Pakistanis from different parts of Pakistan. You'll see a resurgence of local ethnic nationalism, which is fine because you must have a sense of pride in your own culture. And yet that is again creating tension and friction. Where is that going to land you in? And with a fragile structure like the Pakistan state, it's going to create major problems in the future. So unless these issues are resolved, I'm only as a scholar pointing out the problems. The solution must come from the leaders of Pakistan. But the leaders of Pakistan, frankly speaking, Ahmed, I don't think they have such a casual attitude to education. I'll give you an example. Once one of my books was being launched in Islamabad, and there was all these VIPs, the British ambassador and American ambassador on the panel. And the minister in Pakistan, who had been asked to be the chief guest, he arrived half an hour late. He came to the panel and then he said very charmingly, he's a very charming man, and he said, I haven't had time to read the book. And he just stood up there. And I was so appalled. I said, here he is with all these foreigners, and he's admitting that he's going to now waffle on something which he hasn't read. He has no idea. That summed up Pakistan, that a minister did not have time to read a book which he was now representing and speaking about. So I would really want these people to read a little bit, think a little bit, talk a little bit. I listen to a lot of these chat shows in India today because they spend a lot of time commenting on Pakistan, a lot of their time, and very negatively. And they're reading books, they're quoting books, they're writing about Pakistan. There's a new book on the Pashtun issue, on Pakhtunistan, etc., etc. And I ask myself, where is the counter? Where are you guys then countering this intellectually, in a scholarly way? And I know that you and Raza Rumi and the team have been very, very active. But this needs to be multiplied so that we have again, and this feeds into the idea of Pakistan. I'm not talking about ideology, I'm talking about the grand narrative. Without something connecting you philosophically and with the center and the periphery, structurally, you will be a weaker nation.
No, thank you so much. You've interested and highlighted a lot of very prominent things. And we would love to have you again and, to discuss those in detail. Some of the things, you mentioned the ministers and their ability and how they've been governing Pakistan. So that's an entire topic, whether they even have the ability to govern in a rightful manner, in a trustworthy manner, because the issues that we see tend to highlight their not just their lack of competence, but their lack of intention as well. Secondly, you mentioned about the grand narrative. And I think it would, without making it controversial, but I think there's a need to revisit the grand narrative, because of the fact that even 75, 80 years later, it has not been implemented. So just to point out, can we reform the narrative? Is there a need to have narratives have been redeveloped ever in other countries, in other nations, in history, when things are not meant to work that they were? And a lot of things relating to the concept of Pakistan and where we currently stand. But I guess we're running out of time. But if you would be willing enough to be the guest again, we'd love to have you, and we'll delve.
Ahmed, my honor. Thank you so much. I want to end with one quotation of a lady. We were discussing books, and she just closed the argument by saying, "I never ever read, full stop." And she said it with such pride, Ahmed. And she was a very important lady, and her husband was someone very important. So I just felt that summed up the attitude of Pakistanis to reading. And I'm not saying that we don't have a very talented pool of writers and scholars and poets and so on. I admire them because in spite of this negative environment, they're still there and they're still producing high quality stuff.
That's right. No, absolutely. So I think the biggest takeaway today, and the lesson for all the Pakistanis and our viewers who are listening anywhere in the world, is that you need to pick up a book and you need to start reading.
Ahmed, I was hoping you'd say read Akbar Ahmed's books.
No, please, of course. Akbar Ahmed Saab has written more than 20 books. He's a commendable.
I'm just joking. Ahmed. Thank you so much, Ahmed.
Thank you.
Khuda Hafiz.